Welcome everyone! Today we begin a journey that'll span multiple games, multiple consoles, and multiple videos. A journey that'll feature one of my favorite video game franchises of all time, classic Mega Man. Our hero has had a long video game career, and to the best of my ability, I will be covering each part of it, ranging from his platformers, to his appearances in fighting games, and even the time he was in an FMV rail shooter. To let you know, I will be covering some background on each game, and this retrospective will be from my North American point of view. So I'll be leaving things out like the European box art and release dates. Sorry overseas viewers. So let's go ahead and start this journey, and the best way to do so is at the beginning. Mega Man 1, or Mega Man as it was known when it came out in 1987, was mainly designed to be a game specific to home consoles. At that point in time, the company, Capcom, was focused on arcades, whether it's making new game machines or porting them to consoles. The team tasked to create Mega Man consisted of 6 individuals, one of them being Keiji Inafune. For those who don't know, he's often been labeled as the quote-unquote father of Mega Man in various outlets. He was not. He joined the team while development was well underway. He would, however, become the franchise's shepherd until he left Capcom in 2010. Now, Inafune did design nearly all of the game's characters and enemies, the only exceptions being Dr. Light and Roll, with Robot Masters Cutman, Iceman, Fireman, and Gutsman being designed by other people. If you're wondering, Inafune's first contribution would be the Robot Master Electman. Even the titular hero was being designed when Inafune joined, though he did help with the finishing touches by drawing inspiration from the Astro Boy manga. You can definitely see that inspiration in the end credits. The person who made the initial Mega Man design, in case you're wondering, was Akira Kitamura, the director of the game. Inafune would give him the credit as the true father of the character, even describing him as his mentor during the game's development. Mega Man was given his blue colors due to the NES, or rather the Japanese counterpart the Famicom, having the most shades of that specific color in the machine's palette. As for the character's name, several ideas were thrown around like Mighty Kid or Rainbow Man. I'll explain the second one in a moment. Ultimately, they decided on the name Rockman, after the musical genre rock and roll. The second part would become his sister's name. The series would go on to embrace the whole musical naming motif. When the game was brought over to America, Capcom's senior vice president at the time, Joseph Morikai, I think that's how you say his name, changed the hero's name from Rockman to Mega Man. You know, as much as Rockman works with the musical naming motif, the name Mega Man does fit our hero better. He's a jack of all trades, as you'll see, having the ability to do many things. That's not the only difference the game experienced between regions. The game was successful enough in Japan to be localized in the first place, and when it was time to create the box art, instead of using the anime designs of the characters for the North American version, they quickly commissioned what would become one of the worst box arts of all time. Personal story time. This is not my first Mega Man game. I'll let you know what it is later on, but when I decided to check out the earlier games, and I looked at that cover for the first one, I was like, wait, is this even the same series? He looks like a man in a blue and yellow jumpsuit holding a gun instead of the cartoon boy with an arm cannon. No wonder Bad Box Art Mega Man, as he would later be known as, would become the butt of many jokes throughout the years. I would tell you how the developers designed the game, but it would be easier to explain it as I play through it. So let's go ahead and pop this baby in. The game starts with practically no fanfare. That's how it was back in the day. Sometimes a game would explain what's going on through text, but if you want to dig a little deeper, you would have to go to the game's manual. While I don't have the original NES manual, the Mega Man Anniversary Collection manual has faithfully reprinted the story from the NES booklet. Let's see what the story says and okay. Mega Man 1, the Mega Man story. It's Mega Man versus the powerful leaders and fighting forces of Monsteropolis. That strange, multifaceted land of robot-like humanoids. Brilliant scientist Dr. Light conceived the construction of fully operational human-like experimental robots to perform specific everyday duties. Dr. Light and his assistant Dr. Wily, encouraged by their very first human robot Megaman, proceeded to develop 6 additional humanoids, all programmed to perform prescribed rituals. But, with the exception of Megaman, all of Dr. Light's near-human robot experimentation went awry. Assistant Dr. Wily turned disloyal, reprogramming Dr. Light's humanoids, now bent on destroying opposition so Dr. Wily can control the world and its resources. Resisting reprogramming, Megaman is chosen as the defender of the universe and its inhabitants. Megaman dares to single-handedly penetrate 7 separate empires of Monsteropolis, eliminating the leaders and followers of these sovereignties. Get ready for some very exciting challenges. Capcom localization, everyone. And what you just heard is the fixed version. In the original version, Dr. Light's name is spelled as Dr. Wright, with a W. It's a Japanese language thing with the L's and the R's. Anyway, enough of this fanfic, here's the real story. It's the year 2000X, and renowned scientist Dr. Thomas Light has created a series of robots with advanced AI capabilities. 2 of them would be his robotic helpers/children, Rock and Roll. 6 other industrial robots will be put to use in various fields. Cutman for timber felling, Gutsman for land reclamation, Iceman for exploring Arctic environments, Bombman for demolition, Fireman for waste management, and Electman who will control the voltage of an atomic energy plant. One day, a former friend and rival, Dr. Wily, stole these 6 robots and reprogrammed them to be used for his plan to take over the world. All of this is because he's jealous of Dr. Light's success. Rock, having a strong sense of justice, volunteers himself to be transformed into a super fighting robot in order to thwart Wily's schemes. And thus, Megaman was born. And that's our goal for the game. Stop the robots, or Robot Masters as they're known, as well as defeat Dr. Wily. The gameplay mechanics involve Megaman running, jumping, and shooting his basic weapon, the Mega Buster. It's not a bad weapon. It can destroy most enemies, you can run while shooting, and you can fire multiple blasts in a row. The only downside is you can only fire in the direction Megaman's facing. That's probably because the game wants to put more emphasis on the different kinds of weapons Megaman can acquire. Oh yes, when you defeat a Robot Master at the end of the stage, you get to take their weapon as your own. I'll discuss the weapons in greater detail when I talk more about the Robot Masters. Switching between weapons is as easy as hitting the start button, highlighting the weapon, and pressing start again. A nice visual indication that Megaman is using a different weapon is he is rocking a different color scheme. Now you understand why one of the possible names for Megaman is Rainbow Man. The menu display is simple, but I like it. You start off as just normal Megaman, but as you continue to fill up the display with more weapons, you get a sense of power and accomplishment. In the end, it doesn't matter which weapons you decide to use, because enemies will attack you regardless. And if Megaman takes damage, his life bar, shown on the screen to the upper left corner, decreases. And if empty completely, Megaman goes boom. Now if an enemy does hit you, for a few seconds, you are invulnerable. Use the chance to hit them back, or run away quickly. The only time the invincibility doesn't work is if Megaman touches spikes that are laid out throughout the levels. Yeah, one touch, and that's all she wrote. Luckily, you can replenish Megaman's health with these yellowish white orbs. The size determines how much health you get back. They can be found lying around levels, or you can get them as enemy drops. Speaking of energy, swinging back to the special weapons, using them will cost energy. They have their own energy bars, which is to the left of the health bar. And just like the health, they can be replenished if you pick up the weapon energy capsules. Again, the size determines how much energy you get. What's notable about the weapon capsules is they change color based on the special weapon Megaman's using at the time. In other words, the game is letting you know that this energy is meant for that special weapon only. I commend the team for utilizing the NES color palette in this creative way. As you can see, like the health pickups, weapon energy can be found throughout a stage, or as enemy drops. If you've glanced at the pause menu a bit, you might have noticed this smiling Megaman head near the bottom. Those are his lives. You start the game with a set amount, and despite appearing to be 2 lives, this, as well as future Mega Man games, operate by the 0 counts as a life rule. So in reality, you start off with 3 lives. You can get more lives by, yes, finding them lying around stages, and as enemy drops. If you do happen to get a game over, you have the option to restart a stage, or have the option to choose another one. We'll get to that in a moment. And if you've already defeated a Robot Master and gained their weapon, that progress will remain. Basically, you have unlimited continues, as long as you don't turn off the game. The only real consequence in getting a game over is that your score is reset to 0. Oh yeah, the score system. Other than bragging rights, it's completely worthless. You don't get extra lives when you score a set number of points. There's no secret when you reach this set number. It's just there. A lot of times, you'll see enemies drop these balls instead of health or weapon pickups. They're just bonus multipliers that add to the already useless score at the end of a stage. It's one of the things, barring remakes, that I will not miss in future Mega Man games. So let's move on to the levels themselves. One of the innovative things about this game is that you can choose which order you tackle the Robot Masters. No matter who you select first, you need to know that the levels themselves have your standard enemy/platforming obstacles. One thing I've always liked about the stages is that there are checkpoints, meaning that if you die after passing one, you start at the checkpoint and not at the beginning, which is a massive time saver. There are usually 2 per stage, one around the midpoint, and one in the hallway before a boss. Sometimes what I do when I don't have enough health, and have the lives to spare, is I let the boss kill me, then I'll respawn in the hallway with full health, and a greater chance to defeat them. By the way, the Robot Masters have their own health bar, letting you know how much damage you're doing to them. For the first game, the old let the boss kill me and I'll respawn in the hallway strategy will not come into play for 4 of the bosses. It's due to said hallways having some enemies in them. While they can hinder you, they can also help you. By moving to the left or right a bit, you can respawn enemies and repeatedly shoot at them in the hopes that they drop weapon or health items. Farming enemies for goodies will be my go-to strategy during this journey. There's no shame in doing that. Gotta be prepared, that's all. Well, I've put this off long enough. Let's finally get to the Robot Masters. My first choice shall be Cutman. His level mainly consists of Mega Man climbing upwards and facing off against the Octopus Battery enemies. A lot of Octopus Battery enemies. There are also a couple of buildings that shoot out scissors, reminding you of whose level this is. At the end before the boss door is one of the most notorious normal enemies of the game, Big Eye. It takes a lot of shots to destroy this thing, and if it touches you, you'll lose 1/3 of your health. Sometimes it's just best to run underneath when it jumps high. And trust me when I say, we'll see more of these big before the boss door enemies throughout the games. Cutman himself runs and hops around while throwing his weapon at you. But he's not that difficult. His weapon, the rolling cutter, is practically a boomerang in the form of scissors. It goes in a curved pattern before returning to the user. It's the only weapon that can destroy these things. The Gabiolas, annoying floor obstacles that move back and forth, and they move faster when Mega Man's on the same ground they're on. What the developers were going for with this game is using the old rock, paper, scissors mechanism. You get a special weapon, then you find a Robot Master who's vulnerable to said weapon, and repeat the process until they're all done. Now that we have Rolling Cutter, we'll take on the Robot Master that's weak to it, and that would be Electman. If you think Cutman's stage had a lot of climbing, that's nothing compared to Electman's. Besides the enemies, the main obstacles are these bursts of electricity. Try not to get hit by one during your climb, or else Mega Man will go down. If you choose this stage before, say, Iceman's, then this will be the first time you'll encounter a very frustrating platforming puzzle. Appearing blocks. They appear for a few seconds, then disappear while others appear in a different location. The key to using the blocks to advance is observe the pattern, then time Mega Man's jumps accordingly. And you better get used to these blocks because they will be a recurring element in the games. There are ways to bypass the blocks. I'll even show one of them very soon. When reaching the hallway leading to Electman, it's actually vertical compared to the horizontal ones most Robot Masters have. And Electman's not the only Robot Master to have a vertical hallway. Electman himself goes down like a chump when you use Rolling Cutter on him. As a reward, you get Thunder Beam, a great weapon that has Mega Man shooting powerful electricity, not only from the front, but from the top and bottom. Really comes in handy when dealing with enemies you cannot reach. There is a special trick you can do with Thunder Beam, which I will reveal later. Going back to Electman stage for a bit, during your climb, you may have noticed this blue object behind some oddly shaped blocks. And for some reason I can't get it. Come on, I want it. Well, let me get it. Well, guess what? We can't get it right now because we don't have the right weapon. Thankfully, we can replay stages after being the Robot Masters, so all we have to do is replay Electman stage after getting what we need. Yeah, remember when I said about choosing which order you can take on the Robot Masters? Well, you are free to do so, but if you go the way I just did, then you'll have to backtrack to Electman stage at some point, and that's a waste of time. So we're going to start this journey over, and this time, I'm going on a route that won't require any backtracking. So let's start with Bomb Man. One thing to know about his level is it debuts a very annoying enemy, the Sniper Joe. These green one-eyed robots have shields that can block Mega Man's shots, and the only way to attack it is when it lowers its shield to attack you. We'll be seeing more Sniper Joes and its variants in future games. Bomb Man's boss hallway, like Electman's, is vertical. However, this one is going down, like you're descending into the underworld or something. Bomb Man just hops around and throws his bombs, which are easily dodgeable, which means he can also be a good starter boss. Afterwards, Mega Man gets Hyper Bomb. It's nothing too special, it's just a bomb. You throw it, and it explodes a couple seconds later. The blast taking out enemies. Sadly, it doesn't destroy those weird looking blocks, but it can destroy the Robot Master that has a weapon that can do the job. Guts Man. After arriving at his level, we meet these things. The Mets, or Metars, or Metools, or however they're called. Hard hat enemies that are invulnerable to Mega Man's shots. You have to wait for them to open up and fire, exposing their vulnerable underside. Like the Sniper Joes, we'll see variants of this enemy in the future. If Guts Man's stage is infamous for one thing, it's these moving platforms over a bombless pit. It's challenging enough due to timing, but as you can see, some lines are exposed, causing the platforms to switch down. If Mega Man is on the platform when that happens, he drops like a rock. I won't lie, it may take a number of times for you to get past this section, especially if you cannot get the timing down. A small bit of mercy is, this section is at the beginning of the stage, meaning you can keep trying as many times as necessary. Even if you do get a game over, just hit continue, and bam, you're back at the beginning of the stage, ready to try again. Thankfully, once you make it past the platforming section, the rest of the stage is relatively easy. When you reach and fight Guts Man, his movements can stun Mega Man, leaving him vulnerable to have boulders thrown at him. Using Hyper Bomb can be difficult since Guts Man can hop out of range, not to mention the delayed explosions. Upon defeating Guts Man, we get his weapon, Super Arm. It's very limited as it's only used to pick up those weird looking blocks seen throughout the stages. Now those blocks can be used against enemies, and the ability is the weakness of Cut Man. That's why there are 2 blocks in his boss room. If Super Arm's used correctly, those 2 blocks are all we need. Now we can return to Electman stage and get that blue item, which in my opinion is one of the best items in the game, the Magnet Beam. It allows Mega Man to create temporary platforms for him to jump on, which is useful for bypassing some platforming obstacles. Just make sure you're not on it when it disappears or down you go. And it's required to beat the game. You'll see why later. For now, let's continue our journey by taking on Iceman. His stage is your typical ice stage, where Mega Man slips and slides. A problem since in normal levels, Mega Man already has some traction issues. I guess like used too much grease when changing Rock into a super fighting robot. Anyway, this stage is great for using the Magnet Beam, as you can use it to ignore the appearing blocks, as well as getting past this section with platforms that shoot at Mega Man. Just keep an eye on the energy usage. As for Iceman, he goes down quickly thanks to Thunder Beam. But be careful, even if you manage to take him out, any projectiles that remain can still hurt you, and if you're low on health, you'll die and it will count as a loss. You have to get that circle thing that appears in order to complete the stage. His weapon, Ice Slasher, can freeze enemies, leaving them vulnerable to any other attacks, useful against some of those tougher enemies. And of course, it's the weakness of our final robot master, Fireman. Ice Slasher can be used on these fire pillars to temporarily freeze them and create platforms that allow Mega Man to reach higher areas. Other than that, there's nothing memorable about this stage, except for maybe these fire enemies that pop up and float down. Fireman goes down quickly when you use Ice Slasher. Again, be mindful of the projectiles. The weapon, Firestorm, not only has Mega Man shooting fire projectiles, but it also creates a brief fire shield when doing so, which hurts enemies on contact. That's amazing. A shield-based weapon. File this away for later. If you're wondering, yes, Firestorm is the weakness of Bomb Man. With all the Robot Masters defeated, it's time to take on Wily himself. Before selecting him, if you haven't already returned to Elecman stage to get the Magnet Beam, do so, because once you select Wily, it's a straight shot to the end. The opening of Wily's first stage lets you know that playtime's over, by throwing 3 big eyes at Mega Man. I remind you, they take off 1/3 of your health. Best to use Ice Slasher against them, and then just move on. They're not worth it. That's pretty much Wily stages in general, throwing in enemies and obstacles from past stages to challenge our hero. But thankfully, we now have the tools to get past them, as long as you have the energy to spare. Which brings us to one of the most problematic things about Wily Stage 1. After you pass the shooting platforms and insta-kill spikes, you climb a ladder and reach what seems like an impassable section. This is why the Magnet Beam is required. You're expected to use it to make platforms in order to reach the ladder on the other side. If you so happen to run out of energy, you can return to the previous room below and refill it using the weapon energy. And it respawns every time you return to that room. However, if for some reason you did not pick up Magnet Beam before heading to the Wily stages, you're screwed. Unless you kill yourself, get a game over, and choose Stage Select, so you have another chance to go to the Elecman stage and get the Magnet Beam. Thankfully, the only required Magnet Beam section is in Wily Stage 1. If you think the Magnet Beam section was a migraine, wait till you meet the boss at the end of Wily Stage 1, the Yellow Devil. Aptly named because being the boss can be torture. It moves around in block segments from one end of the room to the other, and when fully formed, it opens its eye, its weak point by the way, long enough to shoot at Mega Man before it repeats the process. The blocks move in a noticeable pattern, and once you recognize it, the boss becomes a little easier, if your timing is good. Shoot the eye with Thunder Beam, and it will go down eventually. This image right here sums up my experience. I can imagine players quitting the game based on this boss alone, and I don't blame them. Now I get it, the enemy difficulty needs to be raised, but there's a difference between gradual build-up and 0 to 100 in a second. I have some good news for you though, there is a way to make this boss easier for you, though it depends on which port of the game you're playing, and on which console you're playing it on. If you recall, pressing the start button brings up the menu screen, and pauses the game. What if I were to tell you, there's a second pause button, the select button. By pressing it, we pause the action without the menu screen popping up, and we can get in and out of a pause very quickly. And what if I were to tell you that certain weapons can be exploited this way? Like say, Thunder Beam? This is the special trick I was alluding to earlier. By firing Thunder Beam at an enemy and going in and out of pause using select, you can score multiple hits with one Thunder Beam blast. Look how much damage I did to Yellow Devil in one shot. So if you can, use the trick against this boss and you should be fine. Thankfully, after every Wily stage, Mega Man's health is refilled. Weapon energy, on the other hand, does not. Probably because it adds a sense of challenge to these levels. Wily Stage 2 introduces a staple of the series that will be refined in the next game, the Robot Master rematches, also known as the Boss Rush. Though we only fight Cutman and Elecman here, it should be no problem since we have their weaknesses. Scratch that, we only have Elecman's weakness. Cutman does not have any super arm blocks, so it's just a plain old Mega Buster for him. At the end of the stage is our second boss, Copy Robot. Just as the name suggests, It'll copy every weapon Mega Man uses. If you use Thunder Beam, it will use Thunder Beam. If you use Rolling Cutter, it will use Rolling Cutter, and so on and so forth. The only exceptions are Super Arm, since there are no blocks, and Magnet Beam, since it's not really a weapon. I tend to use Firestorm against it because, in addition to using whatever weapon you're using, it moves around in an attempt to make contact damage, and will run straight into my temporary fire shield like an idiot. The third Wily stage is a sewer area, where at the end is a series of robots known as CWU-01P. They move around the room while producing smaller units to attack you, and when a big one is destroyed, another one appears. We have to keep destroying them until the health goes away, and every new one that appears is faster than the last. The blocks in a room are a major clue that you can use Super Arm against them. And now, for the final stage of the game. You may notice that in one of these hallways, there are statues of Gutsman on the ceiling. Apparently, Wily has an odd fascination with the Robot Master that we'll see throughout the series. Within the context of this game, there is a possible explanation for this. The Wily Fortress we're in is actually a modified robot factory. The game does not tell you this, I had to look it up. With that in mind, I'm to assume that these Gutsman statues are really just unfinished copies. Makes sense. If you're going to take over the world, you're going to need to build an army. Hold on a second, does this mean the Robot Masters we're fighting in Wily's Fortress are finished copies? Maybe? I could go on and on about this idea, but we need to move on. Speaking of the Robot Masters, before taking on the final four, there's a Gutsman type platform that leads us to this item, the Yashishi. Go ahead and use the Magnet Beam to reach it, since this item fills up all of your health and weapon energy. And you'll need every bit of energy you can get, because once you enter the teleporter above, it's a Robot Master rematch marathon with no breaks in between, and no chance to restore any energy. And if you die at any point during this, you'll have to start all over. Once you make it through that gauntlet, the game will set up a checkpoint because it's time. Time to take on Wily. Before you enter his boss room, there is some weapon energy if you need it. I recommend filling up Firestorm and Thunder Beam. Wily Machine 1, Stage 1 is weak against Firestorm, and once you trigger Stage 2, switch out to Thunder Beam. Wily will hit you hard with projectiles, so it's a matter of attrition. Firing Thunder Beam at the front does double damage, and if you use the pause trick, you can wipe the floor with him. And with that, for the first time, Wily's defeated. And get used to this image of him getting down on his knees and begging for mercy. We never see what happens to Wily. I assume he was turned over to the authorities, because next time we see Mega Man, he's running home while the end credits play out. Beforehand, we get some ending text stating he brought peace to the world after stopping Wily, but then it says the never-ending battle continues until all destructive forces are defeated. So fight on, Mega Man, for everlasting peace. And fight on he will. Mega Man 1 is not a game you should try if you're just getting into the series. Trust me, start with a later game, and then play this one to see how it all began. These days though, it's easier to play thanks to modern gameplay conveniences, but back then, this is a textbook case of Nintendo hard gaming. There are some good things about it, like the stage select, the different weapons, and some good music, courtesy of composer Maname Matsume. Still, Mega Man didn't do quite as well as Capcom hoped. While the difficulty played a big part, I also think the promotion, especially in America, was terrible. Seriously, back then, would you buy a game based on this box art alone? Capcom was ready to just write off Mega Man entirely, and had it not been for the passionate development team, the Mega Man journey could have ended right here.